Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me. Whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording, I just appreciate you watching. So today, what we're going to do, since this is a 2-week module, I tried to make as many modules as possible in this course, 2-week modules, so you can have time and kind of sit down and work on your projects, what I'd like to do for this module, because I had a little bit of trouble when I was first learning this, a couple years ago or so, I had a little bit of trouble figuring out some of the things that I needed to do in order to make things update live. Because that is supposed to be one of the benefits of React, is that I can use things in the virtual DOM and it can update without having to refresh the page. So I had a little bit of trouble when I was first learning all this stuff a few years ago, trying to figure out kind of how to make this kind of thing work. So we're going to be using the use effect and the use state hooks today. Use state and use effect hooks. And these are functions that are going to be critical to being able to kind of refresh what we see in our website. Kind of refresh the virtual DOM, get the new information in there. And so basically, I'm just going to kind of walk you all through the assignment. We're going to need these same hooks in the future. Use state and use effect. Especially when we get to working with forms and things like that. So you'll be able to get your own practice with them on, and work with them on your own. For now, I'm basically just going to walk through this application with you and explain a few things along the way, right? So we'll get some practice and we will do some different stuff, right? What I'd like to have when we're kind of finished today is as close to a fleshed out project as possible, right? So we'll get some component practice. We will make the clock work and make it work the way we would expect a clock to work. And just kind of go with it, right? So we're in Visual Studio Code, just like we always are when we start out these videos. Let's open up a terminal here and let's start working on creating our project. I just zoomed in on the entirely wrong monitor. So I'm going to cd, I'm going to change directory to my E directory, specifically to my Web 285 folder. And now I'm going to do the next thing that we usually do, which is run our create React app application to create our app. So we'll call this npx create -react -app clock site is what we'll call this, right? Just for the purposes of this demonstration today, right? Like I'll use different variables and stuff than I ask you to use in the assignment. And if you can think of a different way that you'd rather do it, then by all means. So we'll do that. Let it run. Whoop. Oh yeah, I forgot. Yeah, we can't create. You can't use capital letters, but I can do that. So we'll do that instead. Clock _site. And so when that's done, loading all the files in, we'll cd into that file. We'll open the project in VS Code, and we will get to work. Should take just a few minutes here to get everything loaded into place. One of the first things that we're going to do is we're going to immediately delete some of this stuff anyway. Right, so that's just fine. And almost Almost, almost, almost. It's so close, right? We could see our bar there being so close to being ready to go, and there it is. So the template dependencies are in. And now we're done. Okay, so let's cd into clock site. Cd clock _ site. That that folder's been created now. Let's open that folder here in VS Code. So I will code -r period. And that should open it up. Which now we have it open here. Open my terminal back up. And we'll type npm start to start our application up. And it's trying. It did this failed to compile thing. If you have that issue, I actually learned what causes that issue recently, and it has to do with, it's a Windows specific issue where if your path isn't exactly the same, like uppercase and lowercase and all that kind of stuff, then it'll compile with errors here like this. But if that happens to you, open the package.json file and just Control-S save it, and it'll then compile successfully, and you'll have a successfully running app. So now that we know that, I'm going to move this to the other screen over here just so I can move it back and forth easier. Instead of having to dig for it in my system tray. Since I have so many windows open. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our source folder here. We're going to go to our app.js. And we're just going to get rid of everything in between the app tags. Gone. We also won't be using the logo, so we can get rid of our import statement for our logo.svg. Which also means that we can delete the logo.svg from our project. Because we don't need it anymore. So if we save this now, it's giving me those compile errors again. So I'm going to go over here and save. And we just have a blank slate. Right, we can see the title is set to React app here. If we go into our index.js, or actually, if we go to in our public folder, we go to our index.html, we can change that stuff here, which we would probably want to do, right? You know, instead of React app, we might want to say current time. Instead of the fave icon that they use here. We might want to use something a little bit different for that. So you can change that if you want to. All right, let's see if we can get one here. So I can just get an emoji. There are places where you can download emojis. So let me just download one. See if I can download like a clock or something. Or maybe I can just find a clock image Just get it from the internet. And I will save it in this project directory. And it might work, it might not. We'll figure it out. So let's go here, go here, go here, and let's see here. That's in public. So I now have an alarm clock.ico here. I just took a PNG and changed the file name to ICO. It works. And so instead of favicon.ico here, I can use alarm-clock.ico. And if we look at our site now, we have a little alarm clock, favicon, and it says current time. So we did that in the HTML file in the public folder. Right, and if we want to change some of the things about the root here, we can do that here. But that's all for our purposes today that we really need to change. So in our app.js folder, let's start out by just making a nice header for our site. Right, so let's get ourselves some practice. And we'll go in and we'll do some styling when we're done kind of getting things in and getting them working. So we'll leave our import for our CSS file here. So let's create a function. And I'll be using arrow notation functions, but remember you can use standard functions just like our boilerplate function app is written in. So we'll make a const header equals arrow and boom. Right, so all we really need to make a component is to just have a return file, or a return, not a file, a return command with a couple of parentheses and a little bit of what looks like HTML in it, but since we're in React, it's not HTML, it's JSX. So we can say something like h1, and actually I want to do header. I want to make a header here and put an h1 inside of it. Header h1 current time. So now all we have to do is we just need to bring in the reference to this header component by including it in our in-between, our div that goes into our app, in between those tags. So that's uppercase HEADER, / greater than. So it is a self-closing tag. And we will, as we can see here, it failed to compile. So we will just click and open our JSON file and go back. And so now we'll just drag our window back over. We see it says current time at the top. So that's a basic component, right? That's what we talked about. And that's more or less what we talked about last week, was the fact that, we can make a basic component and basically just write HTML into it, and we have a modular component. There are ways that we can use arguments and things like that with these components. Right, so if we want to take and pass what we call a prop, which would be an argument in this instance, to this component, which I don't think is something that we did last time. Right, we'd actually have to create a variable inside of here. And just write, say, let greeting equal props dot greeting. Right, something like that. So then here we would use greeting in our curly brace syntax, and when we declare or when we write our tag in here, we could just set greeting equal to whatever we want it to say. Like it is now. We'll make it something different just so you can see that it is changed. So let's do that. Let's save that. Oops, what did I forget here? I've forgotten something. Well, I forgot to import props. Yeah, I forgot to actually put props coming in there, right? I'm using props. But I actually forgot, I forgot to pass props here. Yeah, that's what you got going on when you've got all this, a lot of different stuff, right? So now that I've put props here so it can go in, it knows what I'm talking about. So now props.greeting is there, right? And we could make this whatever we want to make it. So if I change my prop here, and I'll resize my windows here just to see it. So current time, it is now. Let's change it back to current time. We can save this, and we can see it says current time again, right? And so this is incredibly useful for when we are defining things like this can be useful to us if we're doing like profile pictures. Right, because we can reuse these components and just pass them a different value as the prop. Right, so I can actually use header again here, but pass it a different greeting. And it will change, and it will actually add me another component here with the different greeting in there as the text. So it's incredibly useful, especially if we're doing like a profile page or something like that, right? We can bring things in to work with. So we can reuse that. And it's pretty cool. So we save this here, current time. So now let's actually do the part that renders our clock, right? So let's make ourselves another function, and we'll call this function clock. So let's go back full window here, move this back over to my other monitor. We'll create a function called clock, and we'll set it equal to an arrow notation function. And so what we need to do here is we need to be able to have a time that can be set and changed. And so the status of a value of a variable at any given time in React is called the state. It's the state of that variable. And I can update the state and I can change the state. And I can do it with different events. And, we've talked about events in classes previously. An event is a button press, a screen tap, an amount of time passing, right? Which is what we're going to use here. When we get to using forms and things of that nature, we can talk about, different events like button presses and how we can use them to trigger a state change. But in this instance, what we want to do is we want to just let time pass, then check a value, and then update it accordingly. So I need to import something here. I actually need to import the useEffect and useState hooks from React. So I'm going to write import, curly braces, because I'm importing more than one, use uppercase E and effect, and use uppercase S in state. And as you can see here, VS Code, my IDE, knows what I'm talking about. So we're good. So what we want to do is we want to create sort of an array, but it's not an array. It's not an array, but it kind of looks like an array, right? It's a state object. So when we create this state object, the first thing that we say will be our variable, and the second thing that we say will be the function that helps us control that variable, or that we use to trigger controlling that variable. So I'm going to create a constant here, const, and I'm going to put some square brackets right beside it. And this was something that, for a long time, when I was first learning all this several years ago, it was something that I had a little bit of trouble kind of surmising myself. Because one of the things that I tried to do is I just tried to set the variables, use state on variables, right? So I might want, I might do like, time and set time, and then use state on my date object, get minutes. But that doesn't quite work the way that we want it to work. Right? The thing that we learn about React and the virtual DOM is that in order for it to change things in the screen, it actually has to re-render. And so as it's re-rendering, it will update the variable value. But if we don't figure out a way to re-render it, then we're not going to get it to work. So that's what our useState and useEffect do in this instance. And so what I actually want to do is I want to create a new instance of a date object in memory. So it's basically just going to completely replace the date object that's been put into the virtual DOM every time my effect triggers and reruns the code. So I'm going to have the time, and I'm going to have a set time function, right? And these are just variable names that I'm making up. But I'm going to set them equal to use state of new date. So that creates a new date object, puts it in time. Set time is the function that I use to update time. So when I want to set a new time, I will use set time, put a new date object in there, and it will update the time on in my application. Right, so right now we can test this just to make sure it works, right? Because it is still, from this point, it is still creating a state in memory and applying it to time. So we could return here, and we could just add, say, an H1 and put in curly braces our reference to time. And actually, yeah, we could say time dot, what is it? Time dot now. Is that right? To get the current time. And we'll also want to put this, we'll want to reference this component, our header or our clock component in our application. So clock, like so. And I think I used the wrong API there because it's not rendering. Maybe there's a date time API and then there's a regular date API. I think it might be get, just get time is what I want for the time API. So that's using my date object, and we're getting the time. And so let's save this. And there we go. We get a value there. Now that value, we talked about it in some other classes. That's a UTC time there. It's not the, it's the time. It's the number of seconds since like sometime in 1976 or something like that, right? It's UTC time, which is why we typically will do get minutes and get hours. So we can do that here instead in our return. So we can get hours. And then we can just put a colon in there. And time.get minutes. And if we save that now, open this package.json and toggle it for a minute, we get that the current time is 16:28, right? So it is military time, right? It's 24-hour clock. So that 16 is 4 o'clock, 4:28. Now we can do some stuff with like AM and PM here, right? And that is something that we can approach, which we might even want to create another variable for that, right? Or actually use another state for that. So let's take const here, or take this here and write a const. Let's see, what do we want to call this? Like AM, PM, yeah, let's just call it that, AM, PM. And a set AM, PM. And in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to use state. And we're just going to leave the state empty, right? We'll leave it as an empty string. Because we're not going to set that state until we can determine what time it is, right? Like, we can write a little variable that kind of does it, that starts it out, which might be smart. But I want to show a little something different here. So I'm just going to leave it empty. So we could add this to our return now, but right now, I mean, we can just kind of set it as something else. Right, so use state. Let's go ahead and just put PM in here, and we'll go back and take it back out. After we demonstrate this, but this would just be AM PM. And so let's save package.json to recompile. And we can see now that we have 16:31 p.m. So some of the tricks here that we can do, right? We can use a ternary operator. Since we're going to use AM PM here, we can use a ternary operator here with get hours. And we'll also need to use a ternary operator with get minutes. So if you'll remember, we've talked about ternary operators in the past, right? A ternary operator is like a shorthand for an if statement. So I can say something like basically time.getHours greater than 12, question mark. The first one if it's true, the second one is if it's false. So for the first one here, it would be time.getHours minus 12, right? So we can change it to the afternoon time. Colon. Otherwise, it's just going to be time.getHours. Right, so if we save that now, save in JSON to refresh, we can see now it's just 4:31. And so what we can actually do is when we are setting state, we can also check to see if a certain value is a certain way, and we can change the state of AM PM as well to be AM, to be whatever, right? So we'll give that a try. So now we have the basics for what we need, but obviously it won't change, right? Like we're just calling this one time. And we can actually empty this out. Or no, we haven't done that yet. We're obviously just using this one time now, right? So it's not going to update when the minutes change. So I need to be able to do something else. And this is where that use effect comes in, right? We've used use state. We need to use effect. So we need another hook here. So in here, I'm going to write a use effect hook. And we're going to put some parentheses here. Right, so we can do all sorts of effects. There are all sorts of things that kind of go on here that we can do. But one of the big things is that we can just kind of write a function in here, and that a function can take on different sort of things, right? So we're going to put a open and close parenthesis right there. We're going to do an arrow there, and then we're going to add some curly braces. So that's going to turn what we have inside of this use effect into a function of its own. And then we are going to set an interval. So here's how we do that. So this will be how often this function runs. So this is going to have the time-sensitive event based into it. And every however many seconds we define, that's when this is going to trigger and run and just loop infinitely and do its thing. Right? So it's kind of like using a You might have remembered me talking about a game loop in class where it's just a infinite loop that always just makes sure your game is running. It's kind of an infinite loop with a purpose. And we do have a way to kind of clear it out of memory. So it's not just an infinite loop, which is pretty ideal. Right? So inside of this use effect here, let me kind of clear this out so you can see it a little bit better. And maybe we can zoom in some as well. We are going to create a constant. And we're going to call that constant interval. Now we could call this constant whatever we wanted to call it. We could call it I for that matter, just to save ourselves some time. But, we typically call it interval because it holds the set interval function. So we set that equal to set interval. Right? We see it come in our ID, we see it come up in our IDE there. Parentheses, arrow notation, curly braces, right? It's a function. So we use that function syntax. And so at this point, we can write the code in here where we set our time. So in this case, we're going to use our setTime function, setTime, and just create a new object, a new date object in memory. We can also add a conditional statement in here that would check for our AM, PM, right? So we can set, so we could say if time dot get hours greater than or equal to 12, we are going to set AM, PM to PM, else we are going to set AM, PM to AM, just like that. So now we technically have something that will update. Like this will do it. Like we're basically at a completed app at this point. Just to prove that that does it, I'm going to do that. Or not. I think that'll run once when we run our program. So I'm going to go ahead and save just so we can see it work. It might. I think it runs at least once. Or actually, we've not set interval yet. So we have the set interval function, but we've not set interval yet. So that'll cause a little bit of trouble. So let's set our interval. Basically, just right here after this parenthesis, or before this parenthesis, after this curly brace. That's the curly brace for the set interval function. That's the parenthesis for the opening one that's right there beside. I can just put comma and the number of milliseconds I want to wait before this runs. So let's run it every second. So we'll put 1,000 milliseconds in here. And so now it's going to run every second. Then after this bad boy, which goes with the use effect up here at the top, I'm going to put comma and empty square braces, and we'll throw a semicolon on the end here. And that's what we need, right? That'll update. So let's save this. Let's save our package.json to refresh our page. And I think I did my logic wrong. I did. I put less than or equal to 12 instead of greater than or equal to 12 there like I intended to. I know that because it pulled up 4:40 a.m. But if I save this now, hit Control S on package.json there. Oh, it's changing back and forth. What did I forget? Oh, it might just need to be refreshed. I was having this problem yesterday when I was getting my proper... Yeah, there we go. It just needs to be refreshed. Sometimes it can kind of get stuck there in the memory. Right, one of the things that you can see after we load it, it does take a second to put up the PM. Right, why do you think that is? It's because when we declared the state, it's empty. And we're waiting a second before we do it. Now we can clear out the state, or we can clear out this interval rather, so it can kind of clear itself out of memory, which would actually help that little self-looping issue there. If we add right here in between these two, a return, parenthesis, a little return function that will clear interval, and it's going to clear the interval I that we set up there. So that will help fix that. And that's a built-in, those are built-in functions into React. So now we can sit here and watch this. Like if we refresh the page, right, it takes a second for PM to come up. But I'm willing to just sit here for a few seconds and watch it change. So when, I'm not touching the keyboard, I'm not touching the mouse, hands are in my lap. When the clock changes to 4:43, the time on our website should also change. And this will be relevant to wherever your user is, right? Because it goes on, system time in their area code. So hands in lap. We're just waiting until the clock turns over to 4:43 to see what's going on or what's going to happen. And there it is. It went. Hands in lap, right? And we can see it's now 4:43 p.m. I haven't touched the keyboard. I haven't touched the mouse. I didn't refresh anything. If I had refreshed the page, right, you would have seen it because it would have taken a second for that PM to pop up there. So now we have that, right? This is the basics of what it takes to create this site. And overall, right, if we look at our code, code's kind of code looks confusing if you don't know what you're looking at. But it's relatively simple, right? Didn't take a whole lot of effort for us to do that. Don't have a whole lot of lines of code here. Right, we just did it pretty quickly. Do that to re-render. Check that out. Now, the only thing that we would have left to do here is to style it up. Right, so we can use our app.css for that. Let's move this over to the other window. App.css. Now it has some CSS in it, but most of the CSS that it has in it comes from the template. So you can delete all this if you want to. You can keep this text-align center if you want your text to be centered. And I do. So none of the rest of that really meant anything. So I could just start writing just regular old CSS. Since we're already importing this CSS file into here, any changes we make here should be made in our site. So for example, we'll put them both on the same window here, just so you can see them. Right, I can write I can write our asterisk rules that we've written in the past. Make it, padding 0, margin 0, box sizing, border dash box. Right, this is a CSS file. It's just standard CSS. You can see that time jump a little bit because it got rid of that margin. On the body, we can put a background color. Right, background dash color. Something like, I don't know, let's say 222 for a nice little gray, a nice little dark gray there. Hard to read the text now, right? So we can make the default color white. Save that, right? And then the time becomes white. Now we might want to add some classes to this. All right, so let's add a class, and we'll call it like title. And we can say, oh yeah, that's going to be font size to viewport width. Right, so we'll save that. We'll head over here to our app.js. Remember that this isn't HTML. It is JSX. So I do have to put my classes in a little bit differently in my H1 here. So I would put class, uppercase N name, equals title. And let's just Control S on that. And we can see it got a lot smaller, right? So we can actually up the size here, maybe to something like 6. And it's going to get a little bit bigger. We can also do that for like, oh, we can take and we can make time. We can make dot time here in our app.js. In our return here, which is here, we can make this H1 class name equals time. And then we can just start changing some things about it, right? Like if we were to, let's say, make the font here really big. So font dash size, let's say 10 VW. We can make the color, like we can make it like lime green. So let's go like hashtag AA, or let's go AF. A little more blue. So let's say, or no, actually a little less blue. So let's go a little more in the red because I want it to be lime green, and red and green make yellow in this instance. So I want it to be like CF, G would be FF, and B would be like AA. Or that's actually a little too light. We might take that down. Well, let's say 77 for blue. Okay, nice big lime green there, right? Like you were looking at it on a, like you were looking at it on like a bedside clock or whatever, and there you just saw the time tip over, right? We could do something like, oh, Google Web Fonts. We can add some Google fonts into here, right? Like we were doing in the design class. Maybe find a display font that kind of looks like a digital clock face or something. Be kind of cool. See what they have. You could also put a font in here and import it like you would a font that way. Would be an interesting thing to try. When the project is relatively simple, especially now that we've done it together, one of the things that I would like to see is you guys take some creative liberties with kind of what you do with the other stuff. Right? So for example, here we can take, not a bad font here. Let's take like the heavyweight. Get the code for that. And we'll use the import rule. We'll import that at the top of our CSS. And then we'll add the font family to the time. And this is IBM Plex Mono. I have another font selected that I need to. Which one's that one? And why do I have it selected? I don't know. I'm sure I was using it in some kind of project. But we can throw that in there. Save that. Look at our site now. And it looks like that. Right, we do, like I did put a little extra space here between the get hours and the colon, right? We can get rid of that if we wanted to. That's no big deal. We're going to control S on package.json to refresh our site. And that's our current time, right? That's a clock site. We can add other components down below if we wanted to, you know, maybe put some links to something or have some different things going on, you know, maybe an image or something like that. Right, I encourage you all now, especially after we've kind of done this together, to kind of take some creative liberties with it, you know, utilize some creativity, see how far you can push it. Right, like it might be interesting to see if you can figure out how to make maybe the colon blink, you know, put that into a span, make it blink, you know, make it blink with CSS, animations, that sort of thing. Might be an interesting thing to try out. You know, all sorts of stuff that we can kind of do here with this. So as we get ready to wrap up here, I'm basically done. So what I want to do is put this on GitHub. So being in package.json is really the right place to be. Let me get the notes that we've been using to move things over here, just so I'm going through the process correctly. Where are my notes? Way too many windows open. Let's see, not that window. Not that window. This window. Okay. So I am going to Control-C to stop my server. Terminate batch job, yes. And we are going to get init. We are going to get add period. We are going to get commit -m initial commit. Let's head over to GitHub and I moved my work window over here, so let's grab that work window. Let's go over to GitHub and make ourselves a repo. We'll call it it's a clock. We'll create our repository. We'll go ahead and add our remote. And then we will get push origin master. And we'll let the files go. So now they should be on our GitHub. So now I have this branch here. That's going to allow me to look at your code. Right, we can see all the code that I've written here. So we want to go to our package.json file. Under version here, we'll add the home page. So that is home page https:// DE Ramsey, and it's a clock. So that is, for me, it's going to be deramsey.github.io. Right, you would replace my GitHub handle with your GitHub handle / whatever you've named your repo. Mine is it's a clock. And then, of course, we'd go down to our scripts section. We'd add our pre-deploy and our deploy scripts. So our pre-deploy is npm run build. And this part you can do pretty much in any order, right? Like I know we haven't installed that GitHub package yet. I want to do this, and then we'll go back to the command line and just do the rest of it. And deploy gh-pages. So that's going to deploy it to the GitHub pages branch -d and build. Right, so once I save this, I can, in my project file here in the terminal, we'll run npm install gh-pages --save -dev. And that'll install the files that we can successfully push it. And now all we have to do is just run our deployment script that will push it on. So that'll be npm run deploy. And so that's going to create a build that will work on GitHub pages. Let's see, did that fail to compile here as well? Because it said failed to compile. Do I have a... I do not. So it did the same thing that it was doing before, right? So I think if we go here and we just save that again, we can just rerun that npm run deploy, and it'll do its thing, and hopefully everything will work well this time. Oh, no. Was conflicted between package.json, base.js. That's interesting. Node modules, ESLint. Let's see if we can figure out how to solve this really quickly, because it's annoying. It's annoying anyway, so let's see if we can figure out how to solve this. I read something about being able to remove ESLint, and that would just kind of force it to work. So let's try that. Let me... Because ESLint isn't doing anything for you. Linting is just kind of what it gets to write the code for you. So I think we could probably just delete this whole folder. And maybe anything that says ESLint in it. And it would probably work just fine. So let's try that. Because it doesn't really need to be linted, so I think we could probably move past it. Yep, there it goes. Or actually, it gave me a module not found. But did it push anyway? I probably want to get rid of it here as well, right? So let's get rid of it there, because it had a ESLint thing there as it being required. So let's try that one more time. And that was in package.json, and I forgot to save. I forgot to save my package.json file. Let's try that again. And you might not have this issue, because it all depends on how it was installed for you. And did it run? Do I have a branch? I don't. Let's see if there's anything else here that I need to remove. There's so much stuff that gets generated in a... yeah, look at there. There's so much stuff that gets generated, you know, it's one of the sort of aggravating things is that there is so much stuff generated in a React build. And it's in my Webpack config that it's, so that's React scripts. So that's node modules, React scripts, so many modules that are so most of them are so unnecessary. React scripts in the config, in the Webpack config. It is requiring ESLint and so yep, there's that one. Get it out of here. Let's just Control F, ESLint. Actually, I could probably just delete the Webpack folder, or delete the Webpack file completely. And then scripts and build.js. Let's see here, scripts, React scripts, where is it at? So node modules. Yes. R. MLPQR. React scripts. Scripts. Build.js. Find ESLint in here. Is that the only thing in here that's linted? Or that references linting? Or is this because I deleted Webpack config? Let's get rid of the Webpacks. We might just have to redo this. Config factory is not defined. Yeah, we screwed something up here. So let's fix it. Let's see. Let's try doing... So let's see here. I'm going to get my recycle bin. because that's where it deleted all that stuff from. I'm going to restore everything that I put in my recycle bin related to this. So that's Webpack config, all that kind of fun stuff. And restore. There we go. Now it's back. I will run this command, which is npm install eslint plugin disable save dev. Let's see how this does. And now let's try to run our deployment. And config factory is not defined because we did this. So now let's try that. Fingers crossed. Production build. Oh, thank goodness. Oh, thank goodness. So that's what we want to do instead. We want to just run that script that that disables eslint. I will put that back in here. So in this instance, all you have to do before you try to push it is also install this. So that's npm install eslint plugin disable save dev. Do that and then push it. And that's only if you were having that issue, right, that I was just having, where it wouldn't push your live site. So now if I go to my GitHub here, I should have a branch with GH pages. I should be able to go to my settings. I should be able to go to pages. I should be able to open my live site. And I should be able to see my current live site. Now that does show me an issue that we didn't address. Because I told you we needed to do that, and I forgot to do it. Right? If you'll remember, I told you we needed to write a ternary operator for our minutes that would fix that. So let's write that really quickly. So that is if it's less than 10, question mark, we actually need to add a space to it. So it would be, so if it's less than 10, it would be space, concatenated, time.get minutes, colon, otherwise, it's just time.get minutes. We should have done that before we did everything else. But now we can see, I can run the live site again and we can see what it would look like. So I can just npm start here. Oh, it didn't actually delete that. npm start. And it's 5:10 now, right? Whereas it was only 5:09 before. But we can see that that's what we want to do, right? If that'll fix that. I completely forgot to do that as we were working through. But yeah. If it's less than 10, if it's 0 through 9, and we actually need to add another 0 before it. So I need to change that to a 0 string plus time.get minutes. And I might also have to like to string this, but It's fine. You know what? I'm going to leave that one for you all on your output. Because you got another week to work on it. So we're going to stop here. All right, we're going to go ahead and stop here. We may as well. Late in the day. So I probably had a little more trouble with that ESLint issue than I should have. I need to make sure I save that command somewhere so I remember it for the future. That's all that I have for you for today. We'll hang out with the music on for just another couple minutes, just in case anybody here with me live has any questions. If you're watching the recording and you have questions, send me an email, send me a Teams message, let me know. But that's all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.